You're welcome to the Economy and Politics Show. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. This edition will discuss 2024 Nigerian Monetary Policy Direction, the impact on inflation and the foreign exchange markets. Joining me virtually is Dr. Biodun Adedipe, the Chief Consultant of Biodun Adedipe Consult. We're discussing this very important topic. It's nice to have you, Dr. Biodun Adedipe.
Thank you so very much, Ottoabasi. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you. It's a big MPC day. So let's begin with the first question. From your assessment, is the CBN adopting the right policy tools to handle the rising domestic inflation in the country? It's unprecedented at 31.70%. That's headline inflation. Food inflation is peaking at 37% plus. I just want to put the background because just recently we saw the Central Bank of Nigeria, Governor Olayemi Cardoso, put in about 100 billion into the agricultural sector, where he said focus will be more on monetary policy. What do you see? Is there clarity in the ability to address this with the current tools they have?
All right, thank you so very much for that. I believe strongly that what the central bank leadership is doing right now is all within the context of what I would brand as the arsenal of monetary policy tools. And that is talking about the reserve requirements, liquidity management tools, and of course, the almighty, policy rate, so to say. Now, these are basic and fundamental tools for any central or reserve bank that wants to go the orthodox way, as this leadership of Central Bank of Nigeria had already communicated to the public. So what that means then is that they will rely mostly on the policy rates and, of course, in terms of managing reserve requirements for the banking system. So now, if they stay with these tools, then it means their focus is primarily on liquidity as what we refer to as a target, what we call a mid-target toward the ultimate target of inflation rate. So in which case, the whole essence of what they want to do is to manage liquidity within the banking system and then rely on an effective and efficient transmission mechanism that made those banks, in essence, also pull in liquidity from the general economy. So if they rely on those tools, then it means essentially the focus would be what do we do on the one hand to signal to the banks the direction we want credit to go in terms of either growing credit or shrinking it. And that is essentially making it either more expensive by raising monetary policy rate as a signal or reducing MPL as a signal to the banks to also reduce lending rate. And of course, that also looks at the other side, which is reserve requirements now, managing the availability of loanable funds. And that is where I see the challenge we face currently. Of course, we talk about that later. All right. But what that also speaks is at the central bank manipulate the reserve requirements, it will either shrink the ability of banks to grant fresh credit or actually give them more room to lend to their customers. That again is a signal in the direction of what the CBN intends to achieve with respect to growth of the economy. Because credit is a lead indicator of economic growth. So in the contemporary economy. So those are the basic tools they work with. You made a remark about, the issue of agriculture. Now, from what I understand, it's a carryover from what the current management inherited from the previous one. So it's like, look, what do we do with us in the store? The best thing to do is to release it to those that can make good use of it. So I think that is what they have done in this regard.
So in essence, Doctor, maybe the different approach is they are leveraging the Ministry of Agriculture to carry out this particular intervention, unlike the ones that we used to have before. But of course, the Central Bank governor must remember that he promised that focus will be on monetary policy and not direct interventions in the economy. But those balancing is very key. But let's look at the current socioeconomic challenges in the country, Doctor. I mean, you've been speaking extensively at various fora. Of course, I'll say the most sought after economists in the country. And you understand the trilemma of the Trinity, the interest rate, inflation, and foreign exchange rates. I mean, how can Nigeria navigate these issues at a time where the the monetary policy rate is 22.75%, inflation is 31.70, and of course, the foreign exchange market, we're beginning to see some accretion of the naira, but that's sustainable. That's the big issue. So how do we navigate this trilemma?
Yeah, it's a very tough one, you know. As rightly said, we call it the Impossible Trinity or the trilemma. Now, it looks at three major issues, each of them a big one on its own, okay? Fixed exchange rates, then free capital flows, and of course, independent monetary policy. Now, what that simply says is that it is impossible for any central bank to manage the three of them at the same time. In which case, it has to make a deliberate choice of two and then allow the market and the system to take care of the other one. Now, the first of them, which is fixed exchange rate, of course, is an extreme end of the exchange rate management continuum, all right? The other extreme to it is the floating rate exchange system. Now, as we stand today, Nigeria certainly has moved away from fixed exchange rate system, which means that is not an instrument central bank wants to play with, because we have now an FX market that is driven by willing buyer, willing seller principle. So which means we are not dealing with fixed rates, you know, fixed exchange rate system. So that then implies that CBN is focusing on the free capital flows on the one hand, and also independent monetary policy. We now say, okay, how will this play out with those three major macroeconomic prices you mentioned? The, you know, interest rate, inflation rate, exchange rate. Now, if we pick out free capital movement, that takes us back to the concept of capital account liberalization. And that means freely allowing capital to flow in and out. Okay? Yes. Now, when it comes to that, there are preconditions. And that's a very tough one on the one hand. And secondly, learning from experiences across several jurisdictions in the world. All of those that have had similar experience of crisis, either with the economy or with currency or a combination of both. Now, if we look at those experiences, the lesson simply is this. If we are going the way of free, you know, capital flows, it means a fundamental requirement is policy consistency and robustness, which must be a strong signal for you to gain investor confidence. That's primary in that. Now, secondly, it also depends on the financial, you know, system, which talks about the money and capital markets, you know, combined now. They must be well capitalized, which is where capitalization of our banking system comes in here, and other, you know, financial system players. Secondly, they must be well managed, which of course I suspect that is what CBN wants to do with the special examination that we read in the news. It is being conducted now to ensure that they're actually well managed. The third component is that they must be well regulated. Now that means even the regulator itself must also ensure that it is playing as a honest and competent regulator. Two keywords there, honest and competent, all right? So in which case, we look out for those two things in the regulator. If this, we have a way out dealing with this trilemma, okay? Now, the most challenging one there, and that is where I see the leg sticking out, okay? The requirement that there must be also a firm control over public borrowing, and then inflation must be kept in check.
Yes.
Now, if your monetary policy also is independent, that means that the CBN, like the MPC meeting holding today, is free to make a choice as to where do we set the interest rate, all right? But independence means also that you will be watching the interest rate differentials. Take, for example, the popular currency in Nigeria, the US dollar, in which case it's of interest to us, the differential between lending rate in Nigeria and lending rate in the US. Or bring it home to policy making. What is the policy rate in Nigeria vis-a-vis the policy rate in the US? We are looking today at 22.75% in Nigeria and looking at 5 to 5.25% in the US for a 10-year, you know, treasury bond. Okay, so when you put them together, that's a huge differential. Which then points to the fact that, look, that should ordinarily make capital flows that is inwards to be attractive. That's the connection, in the trilemma. So we are very clear about what we want. And I think the central bank so far is moving in the direction of ensuring those preconditions are met. And that is why I think we are in the right direction. Let me put it that way.
Very interesting, Doctor. You talked about the fact that free capital flows and the central bank is trying to meet those preconditions. That also means that there has to be that anchor and support from the fiscal side. There are some structural challenges we have in the country. We know monetary policy cannot address those structural issues. You've been in the advisory level, at top level as an economist, just like your contemporaries globally. What do you say at this point? Top 3 structural issues that we need to really address, because we don't need to say what can be done about them, but what do we need to address now to really ensure that we have these free capital flows and we begin to see stability, whether it's inflation and even interest rates and the foreign exchange market?
Fantastic question here. And I'm happy about the reference you made to the fiscal side of the equation. Typically, anytime we talk about economic policy, there are 3 major plans. The first is talked about monetary policy, okay? Then there's the fiscal policy. It talks about how do we generate revenue and how do we spend it. And that interaction is very, very important. What are we spending on? Of course, the outcome of that is borrowing, that I made reference to earlier on, public borrowing. So it must be in check if we get a good hang of the trilemma, all right? So it means then that in this particular instance, the reality we face today is that more money is coming to our government, both the federal and subnational, and for obvious reasons, okay? Subsidy on fair consumption reduced significantly. Notice I didn't say it's no longer there. But it's now being done, it's now being handled in the form of intervention, which is what most responsible governments all around the world do. So they don't come out and call it subsidy, they say intervention, all right? Now, that is still there anyway, whether we like it or not. It's still the reality if we look at the prices internationally and what is happening in the oil sector globally. Now, the other side to it is that there is the differential in exchange rate, whose impact is still there in terms of the carry-on from when we adopted unified exchange rates. So the gains from those exchange rate differential are together influencing what is on the table for the government to share monthly. We saw the allocation for February 2024, almost 2 trillion thereabout that is shared.
The PAC allocation is really massive.
It's massive. So now that on its own can create liquidity surface and therefore defeat whatever effort the monetary authorities are making. So in which case, there has to now come fiscal discipline. So in which case, we now have more money. What should governments focus on? Notice the plural, governments. Which means it's not a federal government issue. It also goes to the sub-nationals. So what should they do? Now, ordinarily, what we advise is on a very generic scale. There are 3 levels of peace when it comes to fiscal operations. You have your policies on the one hand, then you have your programs falling from the policies, then you have projects falling from the programs. Okay, so now if these are well designed and sequenced, because that's where the problem is again with Nigeria, we don't do proper sequencing. If they are well designed and properly sequenced, then we are likely to find a situation where the more money coming to the top earners especially devoted more into capital goods. That's capital formation, as we call it in the economics. The more capital that you create, the more empowerment for economic agents to become more productive. Because the disconnect in Nigeria is that, yes, more money comes to the subnationals, but we don't see this expended in the direction of what enhances productivity. So we then say, okay, this should go more into capital projects. And when we say capital also, don't be deceived by the fact that in the budget, you see capital vis-a-vis recurrent. And then some of the capital you see there are vehicles, computers, printers, and the likes. Okay, so I'm referring now to hardcore capital projects like roads, and then Can they invest in rail? Can we invest in power? What are we doing about alternative energy? Now, as much as we can say China is one of the leaders of this, climate change and the rest of it, China also today is #1 in terms of alternative energy. So our government look in that direction to invest massively in solar energy, in wind energy where the opportunities exist. So those are the kind of things I expect that these subnationals will be looking at pushing most of this money into, so that it doesn't create inflationary pressures. It will enhance productivity. Okay. Then the other thing there is this. If they manage this well, I expect also public borrowing to reduce.
Because the current 4.3 trillion plus is just huge.
Exactly. So if revenue is growing, then we have no reason to borrow more.
Yeah.
In which case, the direction should be, let's begin that journey now that will take us towards balanced budgets in a couple of years down the line. So that should also become a goal they pursue in this instance. Now, the third plank of policy, which oftentimes you don't even hear about, is the commercial policy. And that is what we do with respect to tariffs, our tariff structure. So if we truly want to incentivize manufacturing, it means tariffs should be structured in a way that supports domestic manufacturing. If there's any producer here in Nigeria that is churning out any commodity, whichever item is imported, which is now competing, should attract such high import duty that will make it so expensive and therefore very difficult for that imported item to compete with the one produced in Nigeria. So it must be a deliberate and intentional. So in which case, we now harmonize monetary, fiscal, and commercial policy. So that is the way we can have the full benefit of the effort central bank is making in terms of the monetary policy that we agree is in the right direction.
Very clear, Doctor. We need to have a very clear economic roadmap plan from this administration and significant investments in infrastructure and even renewable energy, federal and sub. But for the monetary policy direction, what would you be saying to the monetary policy authorities? They face that pressure. Should they look at inflation or growth? What do you see?
Yes. Well, we say it's one of the primordial trade-offs in macroeconomic policy. So the idea simply is that you can't have both at the same time, except, of course, for the aberration of Turkey that we've seen in recent times, where inflation is crazy and the economy is still growing. Okay, so we call it aberration, which means we need to engage Turkey especially, and probably develop a new concept to explain that.
Turkey has gone out of proportion, yes.
Yeah, so we need to find a way to explain that, which is gone out of, the what we call the typical, trade-off between growth and inflation. But as you asked today concerning Nigeria, because we must stay home. Now, if I have to choose between inflation and growth, as much as I desire growth, I think where we are in terms of inflation is a kind of emergency. And my thought towards that is like the typical thing we say in managing a financial institution, where we say on an ongoing basis, what a financial institution wants to manage is the seeming conflict or trade-off between liquidity and profitability. Because the more liquid an institution is, the less chances of producing profit. So when we say which one is fundamental. So if in a bank, we say liquidity is fundamental to the business, what we normally say is that, look, stabilize liquidity. Once it is stable, you pursue profitability. When you get to a point, profitability is threatening your liquidity, you return to stabilize liquidity. So the same is what I will advise. Where we are today, 31.7% inflation rate is more or less like an emergency, given the typical range, except the outlier between 1993 and 1995, where we had the highest ever inflation rate in our historical history, in our economic history. If we take out those years, all right, it means the typical pattern of inflation in Nigeria, in fact, let me back up 1960 to date, we show that clearly where we are today will qualify to be an emergency. So what do we do then to deal with this inflation? That's what I will say. So we need to focus on inflation now, get it to a threshold that is comfortable, especially in our recent history. And of course, I will look at that for the budget expectation for this year by the federal government. And that is 21.4%, okay, that they expect to achieve. So if we get it within that threshold, then we can shift effort massively to growth. And hopefully also growth, if it is of the right kind, and that means it is sustainable and it is inclusive, that growth will also temper inflation. But that means you are producing more goods and services domestically and not relying on import.
Well, doctor, is achievable, but it's a bull tax. It's a huge tax because you're saying like that has to be 10% reduction in the inflation rate. That's to the 21% target of the federal government. That's very, very audacious. But let's see how it goes. But it's very clear that the trade-offs are there and we need to take steps. Emergency period we are in. But let's look at monetary policy actions of the Central Bank of Nigeria and down to what you raised before. How's it affecting deposit money banks in 2024? You have had a foray in the banking industry, especially the fact that we're looking at recapitalization prospects for the banks. And for me, I'm really concerned. The current cash reserve ratio regime is 45%. So how do they play that intermediary function that you just raised earlier? How do they balance this?
In fact, that is the real challenge we see here. When you take the reserve requirements put together at about 75%, that means the window open for banks to create credit is only 25%. Even that 25% also has some measure of restriction in a way. But let's be generous and say 25%. Which means 25% of banks' deposit is what is available for the loan book. So that means then that to start with, opportunity for banks to grow profitably is hobbled. Because the reality, when you look at banks generally, is that the bulk of their income is from their loan book. Except, of course, for investment banks and possibly merchant banks to some extent, before you now talk about, the rest of them, new banks and the rest, other types of banks. So, but primarily, what the policy, bouquet we have now points to is the fact that ability of banks to create credit has been constrained to start with. Also, with NPR marked up, at least the last MPC meeting from 18.75 to 22.75, means it's a signal for banks to also raise lending rates, which of course a good number of them have done. Anyway, that means credit has become more expensive.
Yes.
Contrary to the generative we say about an economy desperate for growth, which is to democratize credit.
Yes.
Democratizing credit means you make credit available. The policy now has reduced the availability. You make it accessible. And then the third one is you make it affordable. So affordability is taken out of it, as well as the availability in a way. So that's on the one side. Now, if loans become more expensive, the question again is, what are the implications for the banks in terms of the quality of their loan book? A very critical element in banking. There is no way our banks can escape more non-performing loans in the environment we are. And it's very easy to illustrate that. Just take it this way, that, okay, you have a loan book of, let's say, 1 billion naira that went bad. In order to fill that hole, you will need to create 5 billion naira loan at an average of 20% lending rate per annum to generate income of 1 billion naira to fill that hole. In which case, if loans are getting poorer in quality, banks will need to grow more aggressively in order to fill the hole. Unfortunately, the space for growth is constrained in a way. So it's a big headache for the banks. And then that also means that if banks are going to recapitalize, it's all a function of attractiveness. How attractive will banking stocks? Let me now come to stock language. How will they be to prospective investors?
Yes.
And then you also look at the reality of the stock market in Nigeria today. The stock market itself is doing very well. Year-to-date return above 40% for the entire market. But when you now go sectoral, you see that the banks are not doing very well in terms of year-to-date return. So in which case, there is a big challenge and headache for the banks if they need to recapitalize in the environment we are right now. So but hopefully, maybe all these steps central bank is taking to ensure that banks are properly managed, we have to also gear investor confidence in the sector, and then also we carry on to the stocks and then make them now attractive to investors. So that is the way I will situate that in this very context. It's a tough one. But again, if CBN maintain the current direction, we may likely see the banks become cleaner and therefore fitter. And when they become that, they become more attractive, not only the stock market, but of new investors.
It's very, very important that the banks are in good shape, Doctor. And you've just given a very clear insight on that, which is a food for thought as we get to that phase. But let's look at today's the big day of decision. What are your expectations for the MPC? Will the current MPR of 22.75% be further hiked or reduced or held? What's I will not say you have a crystal ball, but as an expert, what do you say? What do you say?
You are right. I don't have a crystal ball, but if one goes by what we normally term significant utterances of key government functionaries, what have been the communication coming from the central bank on the one hand, then we go to dimension the decisions made at the last meeting of MPC. Now, the arguments that led to what each member recommended, have we seen any significant shifts in those? We can say not yet, except that the rate at which, prices are changing has more or less mellowed. So if it has mellowed, it suggests two things. One is that to them, they will think the hike we had in the last meeting is actually effective. But I won't put it to the hike as an analyst. I put it to a constellation of actions taken. And now the market is responding to a honest and competent leadership at the Central Bank of Nigeria. That is what I'm seeing here. And of course, actions taken to clean out this table, so to say. For example, what was done with the BDCs with respect to FX, and what is also happening with the participating banks, that is deposit money banks involved in that. So those are steps taken in the right direction. So all of those are adding up to the effect we are seeing, which means it's not the hike in MPR alone that accounts for what we are seeing in the market. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Now, the second point, exactly. So the second point now is that the other issues we're looking at addressing by hiking the rates are still showing some signs of concerns. So for me, therefore, I expect a further hike in the rate, but not in the dimension of what we saw last month. For me, I would say I'm looking at 100 basis points.
Okay. 100 basis points after we had a 400 basis points hike. Well, we just hope. But Doctor, for the CRR, yes, do you see any additional adjustment or a reduction?
I don't see a reduction in that, and I will tell you why. It relates to something we also discussed earlier.
Yes.
And that the fact that currently special examination is going on in the banking system, and yes, I'm sure CBN will want to establish exactly how those banks are before they will tinker those rates. So I don't expect a change in CRR, and neither do I expect a change in that corridor, because the drivers still remain anyway, except that there's some bit of, sign of relief in the FX market, given the appreciation of the Naira in the last 1.5 weeks thereabout.
Thank you so much, Dr. Biodun Adedipe, Chief Consultant of BA Consult, and a well-respected economist. I mean, you've given so much insight, but I would say that the need for us to take an emergency step to address the inflation, the need for a clear economic roadmap from this administration, and the need to invest seriously in infrastructure and renewable energy, amongst others, is critical at this time. And of course, for monetary policy, you say you see a clear direction, sincerity of purpose, but of course, the free capital flows is what we want to see happening. And well, if it's 100 basis points, of course, we'll say credit to Dr. Adedipe. But let's watch out for what happens today. And thank you so much for this conversation on monetary policy 2024 direction and the implications for inflation and the foreign exchange market. A fantastic classic, I would say, and a lot to learn from you every time we have the conversation. Thank you once again, Doctor.
Thank you so very much for having me. It's always a delight, conversing with you, Ottoabasi.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. To our viewers, if you want to get further insights on this conversation, visit the ProShare website displayed on the screen and follow our social media platforms to engage further on the show. Till we come your way again, enrich yourself with the knowledge of socioeconomic developments around you, because it is a wise thing to do. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.